Welcome to the Economy of Wellbeing podcast. Today we have a special guest, Laura Musikanski from Seattle, Washington. And Laura's been involved in the Gross National Happiness Initiative in Bhutan and has been leading a really important initiative in Seattle to measure the happiness of Seattleites, and not only in Seattle, but hopefully in other places in America. So welcome, Laura. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're passionate about in terms of this whole happiness theme?
Sure. So thank you, Mark, for the podcast. My name is Laura Musikanski, and I lead a project called the Happiness Alliance at happycounts.org. So it's lots of happiness in there. So what we do is we provide a version of Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index to communities and to anybody who wants to understand not just how to measure happiness, but how to think about happiness. So if you go to happycounts.org, you can take the happiness index and you'll be able to see what we mean when we say happiness in terms of what it means for your relationships, what it means for your work, what it means for your experience with government, with participation with government, what it means in terms of your environment, and other what we call domains of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, go ahead.
So what kind of, give me an example, give us an example of some of the really cool questions you ask people.
So with these kinds of surveys, you want to start, the first question you want to start with is a satisfaction with life question. Mm-hmm. So we start first with a question that's called, it's a sort of a gold standard, it's called the Cantrell ladder, which you have in your survey too.
Yeah.
And then the next set of questions that you're going to get will be similar, but what we've done is we've included the 4 questions that the United Kingdom uses as part of their Office of National Statistics. So then you'll see another question on satisfaction with life, a question about worthiness, do you feel like your life is worthwhile, and then 2 questions that scientists call affect, which we call feelings. So a question about your happiness and a question about your anxiety. And then from there, you're going to be asked questions about your health. So the questions will be like, do you feel like you have enough energy to do what you want to do during your day? And then questions around your time balance. So there's different ways of thinking about time balance in terms of, are you feeling rushed? And then maybe even more importantly, do you enjoy doing the things that you do during your life? And then you'll get other questions as well. So I could go on for the rest of the podcast about the questions if you want.
But you and I have a common passion. And me being an economist, we often assume that objective data, so-called, conventional statistics, tells us something about the conditions of well-being, if you like, of a community. But like you, I think we have a common passion that actually we're sometimes missing the boat if we don't ask people how they experience or feel about their well-being. And so I'm excited about what you're doing, and I think this is a new kind of field in economics, behavioral economics, if you like. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're finding in Seattle? I mean, the cool thing about what I think you're doing is you're literally showing well-being or happiness at the neighborhood level, the distribution of well-being in Seattle. Can you tell us a little bit what you found?
Yeah, first, to be very frank and honest, I would love it if we were working in Seattle again. We worked in Seattle in 2011 with the Seattle City Council, and then in 2012, we have a Department of Neighborhoods, and we worked with immigrant and refugee communities and had some startling results with our survey there. Most lately, I worked with the government of Kuwait, where they used our index to measure the well-being, happiness of their entire population. A couple of years ago, worked with several different governments in Creston, British Columbia, so with city as well as regional governments, and they used our index to gather funding as part of a grant proposal. But they found, which is the results very similar to what we've found. So we have about 80,000 people now have taken our survey, and it's been used all over the world. We just issued our first for 2018 happiness report card, looking at all of the data. And I'll say that Creston found something very similar to what we found, which is very concerning. And it's wait for it, it's coming, but it's also very similar to what we found in 2011, which is, I think it's a big red flag, which is that young people are not happy.
Wow.
This is very concerning for a few reasons. First, of course, the fact that they're not happy. And then second, because usually in life, happiness is like a U shape, and a person bottoms out at around 45 to 50. We've all known people or been through the midlife crisis. And,
Yeah.
there's something very true to that in terms of like, we don't just go through the terrible twos, we also kind of go through the terrible 45s to 50s.
Yeah.
If you're starting out low like this, and at the beginning of your life, because there's that U shape, right? So that
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
that at the beginning of your life and at the end of your life, things are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But if this cohort of young people today is starting out low, does that mean that things are good, are not looking good for them in their future? And we know with what's coming up, that's a very big possibility. So I'll just jump right now very quickly, another project that I'm working on with IEEE. So IEEE is the international organization. They call it electrical engineers. But
Okay.
what they really mean is they mean, IT people.
Right.
So
Right.
we're developing that's called the Wellbeing Metric Standard for artificial intelligence and autonomous systems.
Wow.
And the fact that this is being considered by an organization like IEEE, I think, is that we have in our culture a concern for the future of
Right.
of human well-being. And footnote, that project is anybody's available. Invited to join it. If you just put in IEEE project P7010, it'll come up and you'll see the invitation to join.
Okay. Put a note of that on. Wow.
I'll send you
Yeah.
I can send you.
That's very
Um,
exciting. Actually,
yeah,
it's something I'm involved in these days as well. So
right.
I'm glad you've raised this future of AI and probably digital profiling and blockchain and all that stuff. Yeah. we could go on forever. That's another rabbit hole.
Well, I'll just finish with that John C. Havens, who's the one who brought this whole concept of ethical artificial intelligence and AI development to IEEE. Sorry, so many acronyms.
I know.
But he brought me in to help with the well-being piece because he knew that I was going to bring in the all right. So I'm not totally a child of the I'm definitely a child of the 80s. So, but I will say the word holistic, the holistic approach to well-being, which is what you're going to find when you take like our happiness index or your happiness index, that we're really looking at all of the different aspects
Yeah.
of what human happiness and what human well-being, and I kind of think of it as like what it means to be human, which it means
Yes.
being part of Mother Earth,
Exactly.
not separate from it.
Yeah. Yeah. In relationship with Mother Earth. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. So, wow, there's so many things to explore here, but so what would you say are the, we're not maybe surprised. I will say that when you're 20 to 25, you're actually not necessarily very happy, and that's, as you said, that the happiness. I said that the happiness life curve looks like the smiley face. So if you're 45, 50, you're probably just bottoming out right now. And
Good
crawling
news,
your way
it gets
out.
better.
Thelma and Louise at 75, you sort of run over the cliff maybe. But are you surprised? Are we surprised that youth today, they're coming, let's say they're finishing their undergraduate degrees, they're faced with student debt, they're faced with, massive mortgages that you and I hope didn't experience. What is it that is the basis of their melancholy, or do you have any insights into that?
Well, a researcher would need to do some analysis around that. And, by the way, this project is open. And so if a
Mhm.
researcher is listening who would like to do that kind of analysis, our data is available. But we can look at what are some of the areas of the lowest scores. And those include government. So those questions are about trust in local government, trust in national government. Do you feel like people, like the civil servants in your area, are like sort of question is essentially like, do they really care about what you think? Are they listening? Um, and we do know that participation um, in the democratic, or the governmental process of your country does contribute a lot to your sense of happiness and well-being. So at least in the US, we have a big disconnect between people and their ability to matter in the governmental process. That's that's an underlying foundation for a culture and a society.
Interesting.
It filters into there's the problem. One of the problems with our government is that we've, in my view, we've confused capitalism with democracy. So that filters into the economy, right?
Have we ever? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The conversation I had with John and is sort of compelling us to think about beauty, which I love. Can you? I mean, one of the, as practitioners, we're both in this space. John made an interesting comment about Ed Diener and his. I guess you were both at a conference, and Ed is, one of the fathers in positive psychology on happiness, and his commentary that, I think if I recall John saying, Ed said, "I think I'm done with surveying. I think it's all about understanding big data." And so here you are, 80,000 questionnaires completed. I've just started my little one only because I used this tool in Tahiti successfully in November. It's a very short form. It's even a little shorter than what you've got or what Bhutan has. And I'm not saying we all have different, of course, there's different ways of measuring it, but it's pretty much based on some science that positive psychologists are giving us. So what do you make of Ed's kind of commentary that maybe big data is sufficient to tell us something about our well-being versus actually asking people their experiential well-being?
Well, in my view, it's not an or, it's an and.
Right.
And in that we need all of this kind of data, and we also really need a way to own and control that data ourselves, so that it's not just people like Ed Diener or Martin Seligman is kind of doing the same thing. He's the thought of, although that he's one of the sort of the daddies of the positive psychology movement that really Maslow kind of birthed, and then he raised it with Csikszentmihalyi. But we've got lots of names going on here. All male. Notice they're all male names.
I'm impressed you could say his last name because I still can't.
But I think it's an and my dream about this kind of data is that we find ways to make it available, and that we're really sharing this data. If our end game is to supersede gross domestic product for countries, profit for companies, and that sense of like how much money do you have as being, or how wealthy as you are as being your sort of baseline, societal baseline for how successful or how happy you are, that means that we need to have a culturally shared measurement or indicator for governments about well-being and happiness for companies and for individuals and other entities. So how do we really share this data? How do we make it part of the culture? And indicators are just one little sliver of the pie. But in a sense, today's well-being happiness movement is based on a desire to change that indicator. So if you look at like the Stiglitz report that was commissioned by past president of France, Sarkozy, right? If you look at what the and the OECD, the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development, which is the organization that that when you hear those reports about GDP in China surpassing the US, that's the OECD that collects and publishes that data. The OECD has also done tremendous great things about looking at different measures, their Better Life Index, their guidelines for subjective well-being. But I think overall, this issue of like, there's happiness measures, and there's well-being measures, and there's subjective measures, and there's objective measures, and there's big data. And I think there's a desire to take a reductionist approach to this.
Right.
I don't think it serves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of these different ways of looking at data are messy. Like, is it really objective when asking people what their income is, right? There's a subjective measure. Is it
Absolutely.
really just like quote unquote subjective when I ask you how happy you are? Like if I tell you, Mark, how happy you are on a scale to 1 to 10 about like that you're eating, antelope for dinner tonight, and you say 2, and I'm like, oh, well, it's just subjective. You're going to eat it anyway. You're going to be like, wait a second, like I actually like that matters, So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then, the big data piece is it brings in a mystique, and we need a way to demystify that and to
Mm.
make that we own it in the same way that we can own quote unquote subjective data, and in a way that a lot of us have been working to own at the community level quote unquote objective data.
Mm-hmm.
So these are data, these are the data geek conversations.
Well,
At this point, probably everybody in your who listens to your podcast is like, okay, I've had enough.
no, like, I think they're getting more intrigued because now we can switch to like issues of law and property rights over data. One of the things that I'm involved in is, which is totally geeking out into the AI. Well, it's not the AI world, but this idea of public blockchain. And so one of the things that my colleagues are exploring uh, is this idea of like, so I often find people want to take the survey. I don't know why. Why do you want a score? Do you want your well-being index? And so interesting that people will just want to self-assess, look in the mirror, without any sense of, well, how's that data? I haven't told them anything. I'm not selling the data, but in a public blockchain future where each of us has sovereignty over our, well, let us say, well-being profile, how do you see that potentially playing out in a future where the big banks, so I think, would desire more of a private blockchain kind of future? And we're not gonna get into defining blockchain because it would take hours well, it shouldn't take hours, but it seems like a complicated issue. But to me, it's quite simple. As all this data about you sits in a digital wallet that gives you some sense of who you are. And the subjective assessment is simply your reflection in the mirror, and it is what it is, right? And as one Tahitian elder said, I would never lie about your survey, no matter who uses it, and the president of the country sitting next to me. So I thought that was an interesting reflection. But any comments on the?
Well, that's just you know, like I don't totally understand blockchain, but I think of it when I think of it as like, because I like to quilt. So if you like take a
Yeah.
quilt thread and you pull it through the quilt, there's a lot of other threads in there, but that one thread, if that one thread is my data, then I could pull that whole chain out, or I can see where that chain, that thread is going.
Yeah.
And I can see, I could see where it touches other threads.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had that ability to be able to follow the other threads, then I could see where my well-being data touches others, and then I could gather information about that. And I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of mystique around all of this right now, but I'm hoping that where we get to is that it becomes very simple. And one of the foundations of capitalism is equal bargaining power and transparency of information. So if we can actually bring these two foundations into reality through IT, that could be really interesting. And if we could do that in our governments with data, that could also be very interesting. Those are like thought experiments and charrettes that I think would be really, really interesting to have, which kind of goes to one of the projects that I just started with. You were invited to, but we'll do subsequent ones, happiness roundtables, to start looking at some of these issues and talking about what needs to happen, and then making these calls. Because if like with, one of the reasons that I'm willing to spend like more volunteer time, because the I'm working on is volunteer.
Yeah, let's be
And
clear. There's a lot of volunteer time.
yeah, is that I think that you have to state what you want.
Hmm.
What Young says, what you resist persists. But the flip side of that is that if you don't state what you want, if you don't state those visions out there, no matter how crazy they seem, um, what is already happening in terms of just keep on going for profit is just going to that'll just continue. So these
That's really
conversations are really important, and like we need to like write those visions out there.
I,
Communication is the DNA of culture, right? We've got to have that communication out there.
well, it's
So
it's interesting. You're reflecting on some of the other conversations I'm having with psychologists and personal coaches, and you're absolutely right. Unless we declare something, nothing's going to happen. I just came back from Singapore, where I was amazed at how 50 years ago they established this very strong set of core values like integrity and honor, and those after 50 years are being examined, but the declaration and the living according to those values is just so critical. As Bobby Kennedy said, we got to start measuring what matters, and we need to commit to that. And then we need the challenges of how we govern, how we make decisions now based on the information is. So I wanted to ask you about on the issue of use of data in terms of governance. So you mentioned Kuwait, which is really interesting that they took upon this your survey tool, but I'm also intrigued with what's happening in England. Post Brexit, and with when David Cameron was prime minister, I see England as one of the leaders in this field, but I'm not sure that they've gone any further. Or do you have any kind of insights or reflections on this question of how do you now make decisions differently from a
yeah,
governance?
that's the question. So Gus O'Donnell is he was the highest in power non-elected official, and he at a conference, well-being over the life course, that was put out by a sort of nonprofit governmental agency organization. He said that we need 1,000 pieces of evidence, which is like this. It's sort of the cart before the horse for some
Mhm.
of these governmental organizations. And that said, because of a European Union um, rule, all of the European Union countries now have to measure subjective well-being, or not subjective. I'm sorry, not subjective well-being. They have to measure well-being and happiness. So they're all pretty much measuring this using subjective measures, except Germany.
Wow.
Because they're like, it's subjective. So this
Those
is
are
the
my
problem.
roots. That's my culture. So.
But it's fascinating, right?
Except
Because
Germany, yeah.
this term subjective is so problematic. It really is. We really need a different word for this. So how is this data being used for policy? So right now, our stellar examples are two countries with very different governmental systems, and I think that's the reason that they're not being listened to, and that's Bhutan.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote a paper called Happiness in Public Policy that in the appendix, it has I like grids. It has a grid that
Yeah.
identifies the policies that they've written based on gross national happiness and what the mention in there. I'll send you the link to that. And then the United Arab Emirates. So the
Wow.
United Arab Emirates, they actually used our data to help form their subjective well-being, and they've been holding the last 2 years these global dialogues for happiness. And they've really been very helpful to the happiness movement.
Wow.
Sachs, Hallowell, and Layard are the ones who are the editors for the World Happiness Reports, and with the support from the United Arab Emirates, they Sachs, Hallowell, and Layard, and others,
Yeah.
the who's who in the happiness movement. So Martine Durand from the OECD, and I mentioned Seligman before, et cetera, Diener.
Dr.
They did the first global happiness policy report.
Wow.
But the question is, what's happening in the United Arab Emirates around happiness? Like, how
Mhm.
are they actually using that in government?
Right.
So I have a paper that'll be, there's one other scholar who's written a chapter in a book that I found about this, but I'm a lawyer and I like to do research, so I spent a zillion hours online, and I have a paper that should be coming out actually this next month at Solutions Journal that is a pretty good explanation of what's happening in the United Arab Emirates. That said, how is this data being used for policies is still the big, huge question mark.
Mm-hmm.
In some of these small communities that we've worked in, they did use the data to, like I mentioned in Creston, youth were doing really low. So they actually put in a sports arena for young people, which was a big deal for them. It was like $3 million. It's a small community.
Right.
But I think right now, the question isn't so much, I think that right now that question is actually a little too, not quite there yet. I think what we need is the solutions of what is the process for government to integrate happiness fully into government, so that happiness really is the role of government is to secure opportunities to pursue happiness. It's not
Absolutely.
to make you happy, but it's to secure opportunities to pursue happiness.
For the pursuit.
Part of that is the economy, but not all of it. And that's where we're wrong right now, is that our governments are right now saying that it's just the economy stupid, which is stupid. That's just plain stupid. If you think about it, if you don't raise your kid, you don't have a baby and go through all that pain so that you can make somebody who becomes a rich person. You make that person so they can become a happy person,
Right.
So I'll just cap that it's about the process. And I'm writing a book right now with a friend, Rhonda Phillips, who's the dean of all these names. Purdue, honestly. Like it's Rhonda like Phillips. A way of saying like I'm not enough. I've got all these associations that make me enough, which totally sounds like me. But so anyway, I'm writing a book right now that is about that, of how based on what we've done in the past years, that lays out that process in a really simple way for policymakers. And we'll be presenting it I got invited to do a panel at the OECD 6th World Forum, which for me is like super exciting, not just because it's all these names and what, I don't really rub shoulders. I'm too much of like
you're
a pragmatist to get too close to me. But grassroots activist.
You're a doer,
to be able to share this knowledge and set these seeds and like I said earlier, like state what needs to happen, because with my project and I know that with you as well, although my project is like we're super grassroots, we're seeing an impact because we are like stating these crazy visions. We're seeing an impact, and I would finish with like anybody listening, like what you've done has already had an impact, and with this work, we can work together to transform our governments and our economy. Like we kind of have to. So
well, you've actually taken my last question away, which is what are you hopeful for? And I think you've stated that. And I wanted to let you know that my next guest is Marty Paradine, who's the town manager of the little town of Valley View, Alberta, 1,800 people, where we conducted, he hired my colleague and I to do a well-being assessment. He's an engineer by training. So it's like, wow, an engineer gets well-being.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing now is saying we're now connecting the well-being assessment to the capital and operating budgets of the town. And so now the asset management system is all about, a sidewalk or a road. And like your example, the citizens identified that the top issue that they thought needed attention was the beautification of Main Street. And so now they created a Valley View Coalition, a Wellbeing Coalition it's called, which are citizens with town representation and funding to now maintain kind of this body that like listens to the people's needs and regularly assesses well-being every 2 years, and then hopefully becomes a model for well-being based municipal governance. So anyways,
it's awesome, Mark. It's really great.
We're excited. But we need more examples like that and more young leaders like Marty Paradine, who's a 35-year-old engineer who you think, wow, engineers get this stuff? Thank goodness. So
yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Well,
hopefully we can do it.
we are doing it. We are doing it. We're kind of
Yeah.
geeks in our own right, but no, your stories are so. Since I saw you at that happiness forum in Vermont, you've done some amazing things, and I'm so encouraged. I'm
Yeah, me too. It's really good to hear all the things that you're doing. So we'll send another invitation if we do another of these happiness roundtables.
yes,
So maybe we can do something more focused on we'll pick specific areas to focus on for future ones. I think this one's more about like just the general happiness movement.
yeah,
But I'd love to have more conversations with you, and we'll be featuring you on one of our ISQUALS webinars too. Yeah. So
absolutely. So I am also doing curating more of these strategy conversations with psychologists, and so I'd love to get your involvement as well, and because there's so few of us as practitioners in this field, and but I'm thrilled that you're getting this traction, and we're actually, it feels like we're actually making progress, but as you said, it takes time and patience.
yeah,
Well, thank you for joining me today.
yeah. Thank you.